Okay, guys. Well, good morning. Here we are. Today is Wednesday, November 26th, is it?
October.
What did I say?
November.
Oh, I'm thinking November. I don't know why I'm thinking November. Thanksgiving, which is my favorite holiday.
Next week is November.
Next week is November. So, just for correction, today is Wednesday, October 26th. So, and welcome to the Mood House. We're going to continue our journey, one man's journey this morning, and we're not going to read the text. I'm going to get this thing running. Hey, Jeff. We're not going to read the text, but we're in the midst of actually review of Jacob's life, and I've created this spreadsheet with these various responses to life responses in Jacob's experience, and we're plugging these into a 7-stage model of growth. We're watching Jacob in retrospect grow in his life, and we're analyzing. And there's just so much here. A lot of really fun stuff that we're looking at. Well, we're going to be looking at stage 3 of that 7-stage model this morning, but before we do, I want to give you a review just to get us up to speed here. Make sure I got my video on, I got the audio on, and okay. So, remember last week we had the whole thing with the low battery problem. Well, what I figured out is I had my power pack plugged. I thought it was plugged in my power strip, but it really wasn't, and it's because I just automatically go home and take the projector and plug it in. Well, it wasn't plugged into the source, and that's why the battery went dead. So at least I figured that out. So we shouldn't have that problem today. So, but last week you couldn't see all this because of that big thing in the screen that said unplug the projector. So I want to review this, that this in my head is what I think happens at this stage 2. Remember, stage 1 in a normal growth process in a human being is the whole thing of security. That's the first matter that we are that we are most concerned with is security. And we looked at the authentic side and the adaptive side, and we'll review that in just a minute. Stage 2 is the idea of being loved, a sense of being loved and accepted. And that's where we are right now. And if we don't feel loved and accepted, it drives us to put on someone else's clothes. Okay, there's the story of Jacob. The instance in Jacob's life is when he dressed up like his brother so he could get his father's blessing. And what a great picture. And I would venture to say that every one of us in this room have some degree put on someone else's clothes because we don't feel accepted. We've responded in some way, and we've looked at that in a couple different ways. Well, this is how I think it works, is that we all, because we're in the image of God, clear over here, number 1, we have an innate need to be loved and to be accepted. That's a default. That's a given, I think. We all, and because we're in the image of God. What happens at a very young age is that we start, our life circumstances starts to teach us how we can get that love and acceptance. These informing messages. The informing messages in Jacob's household was, Dad likes my brother better. Because he's a hunterman, he's a hunter. He's a hunter and he's a fisherman, and he can bring home meat and he can cook and create these wonderful dishes, savory dishes for Dad, and I can't do that. I'm kind of a homebody. Well, those were the messages that in order for me to be loved and accepted, I need to be like my brother. And this informs us. These things build. So what happens in time is as we grow and mature, these images, these messages become part of our being. And sooner or later, we find a tribal group to fit in where these we move into a tribal group inside of something where these messages are reinforced, and we can get the love and acceptance that we desire. This really explains a lot of things. Why we end up the way we end up. I watched a movie that was on Netflix a while back called Holy Hell. And it was this guy's documentary about his experience as a younger man in a cultic group following a leader. And if you look at that movie in light of what we've been studying, it's so obvious. If this is, and we're so vulnerable as human beings that we all want this love and acceptance, and so we tend to navigate and to find a group, not even cognizantly, but where we can feel loved and accepted. Hey, Bob. So here we are, and once we're in this, these images are in our head, and those images are defining. Notice how it's skewed in a different color. Those things are skewed of what true love and acceptance is, and I'm filtering it, and the tribal group, whatever the tribal group is, it doesn't have to be a cult. It could be any group where I find my identity, is that is the good. Inside the tribe is good. And everything outside the tribe is not so good, or even bad, even evil. And so this is, in our Christian way of thinking, this is how we get into a group, and we think that we are God's chosen people. And those outside of that can be Christian, but maybe not quite as good a Christian. And you guys, you got to be honest. Maybe some of us in this room, we've thought about this in the past. That we've got the truth. I know I did. I did for a lot of years. And our tribe informed it. Yes?
We're kind of in a group right here.
What's that?
We're in a group right here.
Yeah, groups are great, but hopefully we don't feel that. I mean, we don't have. If we were filling a huge stadium on every Wednesday morning, we might have something to brag about. But we're not doing that here, guys. So.
But that's a good point. I think it's so much you can never really avoid that as long as you're aware of it. I think that's a key thing. Being unaware of it's dangerous. Being aware of it keeps you from pushing it too far, I think.
Yeah, and Steve and I have the same background early on, and I love those days at the chapel days, but I can remember going out. Remember we were doing that visitation thing, and I remember going out and trying to. These people would come and yeah, okay, well that's great, you're a Christian, but if you come and join us, we're doing it the right way. And I didn't even know I was thinking that. We called it in our group. We're a meeting in God's appointed way. Remember that, Steve? Yeah. We called it God's appointed way. God had a way to meet, and as Christians, and we were doing that. Bill first.
Quickly, I had just to reinforce that, and it's affected my view of things. Early on, I had a strong encounter with Christ, almost a Damascus Road thing, and so I started seeking churches, and I bought from the Ephraim Church to the Assembly of God. And finally, I met this group of people who, at the time, had the answers, and they were called the Way International, and it's a Christian cult of the highest order. And I dove into them head first for about 6 months until somehow some part of my brain said, "Bill, run for your life," and I did. But I mean, within that captivity, at that time, for those 6 months, I had some of the best fellowship, some of the closest relationships, some of the most fun Bible studies. This song was one of the songs they sang. I mean, we had today. It was really a powerful, great time until I realized they're cutting me off from the rest of the world, and that's just not who I am. And I left it, but it left its mark on me in terms of what I rebelled. It left its scars.
Okay, that is, and I'll get your comment in just a minute, Carl. But I want to go with this because I want to ask you the question. Once you decided to run for your life, and you cut off, you left. What happened to those relationships?
Oh, I was outside. I was following God with a little G.
You're out here now.
They said I was following God with a little G, not a big G.
God, I remember as a young man, I had an older man investing in me, and and there was an early difficult time in my life early on that Steve knows something about from the outside, but I and join the Vineyard movement. And I was looking for something more, and it's mixed. It's all mixed up and garbled up. But as soon as I did that, that guy dropped me like that, and that hurt. That really hurt because he was thinking like this.
Our friendships were conditional on being in that
Yeah,
group. When I
yeah.
realized a conditional friendship is not a friendship I want.
Yeah, right. So Carl's got a comment.
Jesus addressed that very thing. The disciples came to him and says, "Hey, there's a guy over here, and he's preaching away this way." And Jesus responds.
Good example. Yeah,
And that was, I think
Yeah.
that's the example.
Yeah. yeah,
Right here.
yeah. And Jesus certainly did not shun that individual. He said, "No, it's." I forget the exact quote. I used to be able to quote that stuff, but
He said it was a good thing.
said it was a good thing. Yeah,
Just
yeah.
because he's not here with us, doesn't
Yeah.
mean he's not
Yeah.
doing his
He-
work
yeah.
over there.
He said, if you're not against us, you're with us, which is
Yeah.
a flip side of something else he said at one time. If you're not with us, you're against us. You have these collision courses in Scripture.
But we're not going to go there.
No, we won't go there.
All right, let's move on. Stage 3. Okay, stage 3 is about don't mess with me, okay? Stage 3. And I was thinking this morning as I was putting this together, remember this old song here? Let's see if I can do this.
Alabama, from a country boy, said looking for a man named Jim. I am a bull shooting boy, my name is Willie McCoy, but down home they call me Slim. They are looking for the king of 42nd Street.
Don't mess with me.
Last week he took all my money and it may sound funny, but I come to get my money back.
I love this.
Everybody say, Jack, don't you know? Pull on Superman's cape. You don't feel the wind. You don't hold the mask off the Lone Ranger and you don't mess around with Jim.
So that's how I want to enter. I had that refrain in my head this morning. You don't tug on Superman's cape. You don't spit into the wind. You don't you don't pull the mask off of old Lone Ranger, and you don't mess around with Jim. So I just Jim Croce song, and it reminded me of of what stage 3 is about. Stage 3 is about power. Stage 3 is when a young person, especially I'm thinking from a male perspective, a young person finally starts to realize their own power, and we see that, and I think it's a natural thing. It's a normal and natural thing, and in the life of Jacob, where that is seen, I know you can't see that because it's way too small. But stage 3 is out of Genesis 29:10, and where he comes into town. He rolls into town, and in Haran, and the first thing he does is he goes to the well, and he upsets the apple cart. There's no one there to roll away the stone, and the people are waiting. They have a traditional response to a certain situation, a cultural ingrained response that no one would defy. And here comes Jacob rolling into town like a cowboy, and he takes matters into his own hands. He says, "Well, do you want to see that? Don't mess with me, right? I'll roll the stone." So there's the first instant. And then the second instance is where he demands payment from Laban. Remember, he cuts the deal for the daughter, and he fulfills his obligation, and he comes to Laban and he says, "I want payment." So it's all about the exercise of power. Okay, power is the third. The stage 1 is security. Stage 2 is love and acceptance. Stage 3 is where we finally get to a place where we can start to exercise our power. And here it is, Genesis 29, 10 through 10 and 21, those two examples I gave you. The action, Jacob rolled the stone, and then later and 21, he demands payment. And the key concern is power, as I've already stated. Now let's look at our our chart here that we're looking for each stage. And again, there's two sides of this. This is natural growth. And there comes a place on the authentic side is that we have a sense of worth to the degree that I can feel powerful. Power is not wrong. I can feel power, but I don't have to tell anybody. It's the like what Jeff told us last week about his friend who was this pilot. And here he had been on one of the shuttle missions or astronaut and didn't have to tell everybody. That is a sense of self-worth and confidence, but it's a settled, mature confidence. He didn't have to go around and broadcast it to everybody. But Jacob is not there. Jacob is not on the authentic. He's over here. He's coming into town, and I'm using the term like a cowboy, and we're going to do it my way. I'm going to roll the stone, and I'm going to cut a deal. He's making deals, and he's exercising his power as an individual.
Win the lady.
And what?
Win the lady.
Yeah, win the lady, buy the lady, Well, over here, this whole adaptive side, and this is where Jacob is, over here. And I've put up here life responses of fear, anger, or shame. And guys, and that's going to be on as we look at every stage, those three responses, because I feel we as human beings, we have a tendency to respond in one of those three ways. And I thought it'd be fun to talk about that here this morning in relation to power, because because I think it'd be interesting. So, if we're responding in this whole issue of power, stage 3 power, and we're responding out of a sense of fear within, what does that look like? We're dealing with the subject of power, stage 3, and we're responding out of fear. What does that look like?
It's defensive.
What's that?
Defensive.
I would. What's that?
Desperation.
Defending your position.
Okay, I think all of these, yes, and I've had a little more time to think about it, but I think these are all good things. I'm looking at it as it's high need for control. High need for control. Because if I'm out of fear, if I have teenagers that are, now that's kind of beyond our years here, but I remember those days, how many of my responses to my teenagers were out of fear and remembrance of how where I screwed up. And I don't want them to screw up. So I'm fear, so I bring in the clamp, the control. Guys, control is part of every human being's life. And that's a stage, that's a stage 3 kind of thing. We got to control it. What does anger look like? If you're dealing with the issue of power, and what then on the adaptive side, we're adapting because we're not working, because we're still trying to prove that we are of value. What does the anger response look like?
Person becomes very demanding or
Yeah, I think Jacob is a great example. I want my wife. I want payment. Putting on demands. High demands. My way or the highway. That's also, it looks like control, but it can be an anger response. I'm going to throw a tantrum. I'm going to do it my way, or just angry. Angry response. This is a little more difficult. What does shame look like? God, if you're dealing with power, the stage 3 power, and you're a person given to shame, just for whatever reason, and We may talk about that in the future, but what would shame look like?
Withdrawal?
I think so. I think so. I think shame drives you underground. And so it would be avoidance. It would be hanging your head. It'd be, it would be suppressive. God, yeah, I think so. Shame tends to do that. And shame and power tend to maybe the kind of person where you have a verbal response that's continually criticizing themselves. I don't measure up. They're hard to lift up. They want to be there. It's almost like you try to encourage them and there's no movement because they're just so caught up with this whole issue of self-shame. Yes.
I was thinking, I never understood quite in David when his one son raped his daughter Tamar, and all that happened. He didn't intervene or take any proactive action, which left a boiling cauldron for Absalom to step into. And I wonder if that was because he was still dealing with the Bathsheba issue or not.
Well, that's a great question, and it correlates with Jacob's response when Reuben committed incest with, forget her name. Bilhah. Yeah. So, these are questions in our heads. Yeah, why? Why was it out of a adaptive response?
Was it compassion and forgiveness, or was it?
Yeah, or was it out of wisdom? That's a great question. Yeah. Okay, so for each of these stages, there's an authentic side. The way God made us, trust in God, and there's this continually this adaptive side of what we're dealing with that something has to happen to that. It's got to die. It's got to die before we can move on. We can move on to the next level. So Jacob, in my example here, what I'm attempting to illustrate is that he, at those stages of life where he comes in and takes matters in his own hands, and where he is demanding a response, he's working out of this particular stage 3. Now, I have a video I want to show you. I'm going to stop the video here because I don't want to be crucified by YouTube.